Hey everyone, welcome to the Capital City Bourbon Show. This is your host Luke, and I'm here with my co-hosts Alex and John. We're thrilled to be here with you all today, so grab yourself a glass of whiskey and come join us on the porch. Hey everyone, welcome back to yet another episode of the Capital City Bourbon Show. This is your host Luke, and I'm joined by my co-host today, John Hill. How we doing, John?
Doing great, man. Good to be with you.
So unfortunately, Alex is not here with us today. He's probably off traveling the world as usual, but he is here with us in spirit, and we will make sure we drink all his whiskey for him. That's never a problem for us. Want to thank everyone for tuning in again. We've been having such a great time doing this podcast and been working really hard behind the scenes, and you have a lot of great episodes coming up. Some great tastings we put together and some great barrel picks from Market Square Liquors here in Tallahassee. And we're really looking forward to sharing that with all of y'all. We also have some really exciting guests lined up. I think actually the next couple months, we have quite a few guests coming on the show. And that leads me to our episode today. This is a first for us because this is the first time we are featuring an Alabama whiskey on the Capital City Bourbon Show. And I think it's actually more accurate to say we are featuring the Alabama whiskey on our show today. And we'll explain to you why that is in just a minute. We are thrilled to be joined today by the national rep for Conecuh Brands and Clyde May's whiskey, LC May. LC, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we have a lot to talk about with you today, and as I said, we have some great whiskey we're going to be diving into. But why don't you start off and just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do for Conecuh and what kind of products you have?
As you mentioned, I'm LC May. I'm actually the grandson of the namesake of our main brand, Clyde May's whiskey. His name was Lewis Clyde May. I'm Lewis Clyde May. I just go by my initials. I kind of grew up around whiskey and moonshining my whole life. That's what my grandfather was, a moonshiner, but he did age in his moonshine into whiskey, which I'll dive into as we go on with the show. But my background really and truly has just been being obsessed with whiskey, moonshining, bourbon as long as I can remember. And I'm very, very fortunate I've been able to turn it into a career. And while Clyde May's whiskey is our flagship brand, we've been very fortunate to grow our portfolio into other spirits categories. We have a tequila called Prospero Tequila and an Irish whiskey called McConnell's Irish Whiskey. And they're all phenomenal, high quality, smooth brands, which is kind of what we stand for and what we do. And of course, my main area of focus is with Clyde May's, but we have phenomenal products all across the board, including Clyde May's.
So where are your products currently being sold?
So all of our Clyde May's is available nationwide, all 50 states, a handful of countries. And then for the most part, the tequila and the Irish whiskey, it's not available in all 50 states yet. It's getting there. There's a handful of markets, but on each of the websites, Clyde May's, Prospero, McConnell's, if you'll just Google those, they have store locators and account locators where you can find a bottle close to you. But I know you're based in Florida. For the Florida listeners, all three products, Clyde, McConnell's, Prospero, are all available in your area. So
that's great.
And Georgia?
And Georgia, yes. All three are available in Georgia as well.
How did you get started in Alabama, and how long have you been making whiskey?
Well, we have a complex history, to say the least. My grandfather, Clyde May, was a moonshiner. He never sold a legal bottle in his entire life. He made moonshine from 1946 until he died in 1990. He was, in fact, the only time he wasn't making moonshine between 46 and 1990 was when he went to prison for making moonshine. In fact, he had 8 children, and all 4 of his sons, including my father, have all been arrested as well for a moonshiner whiskey-related charge. So the whiskey runs deep in the May family. But in 2001, one of Clyde's sons, Kenny May, started the brand legally. It was back then it was known as Clyde May's Conecuh Ridge whiskey. We have since switched it to focus more on who it was really about, Clyde May, and now it's Clyde May's whiskey. But the name of our distillery that we're building in Troy is going to be Conecuh Ridge Distillery. But for a great number of years, unfortunately, it was illegal to distill spirits in the state of Alabama. From 2001, from when we started up until 2015, when they first allowed granting of licenses and stuff like that to make distilled spirits in the state of Alabama. We've been making our product elsewhere to our specifications, to our blend specifications, and to my grandfather's recipe as well. But Clyde May's has always been the flagship brand. It's what really grew this company. But as our company has grown, we've taken on and introduced other spirits just because we know what we're doing, and we know how to make fine products. So we thought we'd, dip our toes in other areas as well.
Well, it was interesting as I was doing a little homework in preparation for this episode, and you mentioned, Alabama having some, what I would call strange laws on the books about distilling in the state.
Right.
But despite those obstacles, Clyde May's is actually the official whiskey of Alabama. Isn't that right?
That's correct. In 2004, but keep in mind, in 2004, it's still illegal to distill spirits in Alabama. No one can. I mean, you can, but you're not doing it legally. They actually made it. They made Clyde May's whiskey the official state spirit of Alabama, and at the time, it caught a lot of flack and conflict. And the governor at the time, his name was Bob Riley. He actually vetoed the bill that was going to make it the official state spirit. But they actually overrode his veto to keep it the official state spirit of Alabama. And I get asked a lot, so why did they, make it the official state spirit if, you couldn't make it there? And I think, or I know that a lot of the people that were involved in voting it and passing that bill, they saw Clyde May, my grandfather, as someone who kind of embodied the everyday Alabama man, very hardworking, blue collar, probably didn't get the credit he deserved when he was alive. And I feel like that they saw more about Clyde May, the man, versus the product itself. But they did name it the official state spirit. And we were the only state for many, many years with an official state spirit. But I recently learned about a year or two ago, Virginia adopted an official state spirit as well. So now Alabama's one of 2.
Wow. Well, that's amazing. With all those hurdles you were able to overcome, and now, not just Alabama, but it's being sold in all 50 states and internationally. I mean, that's really amazing to hear.
It's come full circle, to say the least. Everything happens for a reason, but it really has come full circle. And even though it's been difficult at times, I wouldn't have it any other way.
So you really didn't get started until not that many years ago.
Correct. We like to say that we've been available since 1946, but legal since 2001. So that's kind of our tagline. But we've been making our original Alabama style whiskey since 2001. And then around the 2012-13 mark, we started introducing other products to our portfolio. The first product we introduced was basically the same whiskey. It was just a little bit older, and it was a higher proof, and it was a small batch. And that was kind of the first, release outside the original recipe. And then we introduced a bourbon, and then we did some cast strength products, and we introduced a straight rye whiskey. And now we have a single barrel program we do. So we've come a long way from the early days of having to begged to try to distill it in Alabama. And, now here we are, and we're in the process of building a state-of-the-art facility in Alabama, in Troy, Alabama.
And now you're in all states, and you're in numerous countries, and opening up around the world in just a matter of less than a couple of decades. That's pretty amazing growth when you think about it.
And really, if you look at our history, it's actually been a lot faster than 2001 for a majority. From 2001 to 2005, we were probably available in 2 to 3 states, mostly the Southeast states, Alabama, Florida, maybe a little bit in Georgia. But really, it was around the 2011, 2012 mark that we really took off. We have a great team, a great CEO that has led us to new heights and has done great things. So really and truly, the success we've achieved with being in all 50 states and around the world has really come here in the last, 7, 8, 9 years.
That's extraordinary. Well, you guys need to just sell your business model, man.
We're known for creating and building, super premium products of course, at a more affordable price, and doing it well. And it's a lot easier said than done, but we've pulled it off. But we still got a long way to go. As well as we've done with Clyde May's whiskey, I'm not stopping until my grandfather's name is a name that everyone knows. I'm very grateful for our success, but we're just scratching the surface. We really are. And I can't wait to see where this company and where this brand goes.
I bet. And I've got one more question, Luke.
Absolutely.
But do you still have some of your grandfather's moonshine around, and have you tasted it? And what?
I do. I actually have it right behind me on this Zoom call above me right here. So what I have left is some of the last bit of my grandfather's aged whiskey. And I have tasted it before, but because it's, something that we can never recreate, it's sentimental. Basically, when I was given this last bit of whiskey, I took just a small sip just to be able to say I tasted it and enjoyed it. And then now it's sitting there. But in addition to what I have of my grandfather's, I had batches that my father made, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of the generations of the May family that I have above me, but behind me, actually. But we'll, I look forward to getting in our new distillery once it's finished in Troy, Alabama, and getting some stuff made of my own. I'm very excited about getting there when it comes time.
Well, it's just great to hear that you've, embraced your grandfather's spirit. And, just from what I've learned about him and from hearing from you today and prepping for this, it seemed to me that he had the spirit of he was going to get it done no matter what he had to do. And it seems like that's exactly what you're doing. There's been obstacles, there's been barriers, pretty significant ones, but they haven't held you back. And that's great to hear that you've embraced that and everything that the company's doing. So my hat's off to you for that.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Well, so, talking about whiskey is great and all, but there's nothing better than drinking it. And Elsie, you were kind enough to share some whiskey with us today. Two of, I think, what are probably your kind of flagship whiskey products.
They are. They're kind of there are two best sellers around the country, are the two products we're tasting today.
So the first one we're going to taste is the Clyde May's original Alabama style whiskey. And while I'm pouring that, I wanted to ask you for our listeners and for my own edification, what exactly is Alabama style?
A great question. That's my favorite question to get asked because it's the most important question to ask. So as I mentioned, my grandfather was a moonshiner, and a majority of what he sold in his lifetime was unaged White Lightning moonshine. But sometime shortly after beginning making moonshine, he actually took the time to start aging and laying down moonshine into a charred oak barrel. He knew a gentleman that was able to get him a 53-gallon charred oak barrel, and he would lay it down, one barrel at a time. He didn't have the luxury, though, of aging it for as long as we do today, because, he's literally sitting on 53 gallons of evidence that could be used against him. But, to even do that to begin with was just so unheard of from, his competitors and other moonshiners in the area. Not only are you sitting on evidence, but in their minds, they're thinking you're wasting 53 gallons of product that somebody would buy right off the still. And here he is laying it down in a barrel. But he did it at first kind of as I don't want to say a reward, but it was more of a gift to his best customers that he would give around Christmas time. And then it got so popular that people started requesting it, and they started calling it, "Hey, let me get some of your Christmas whiskey," even if it was July. That's just kind of the name it got because he originally gave it out at Christmas. But what the term Alabama style means, so obviously with it only aging for a year, he wasn't pleased with the finished product when he first pulled it from the barrel. He thought it was a little rough, not bad, but it just didn't have that smoothness he was looking for. So he began experimenting with different finishes and different things he could do to possibly smoothen out that whiskey. And he discovered through trial and error that adding oven-dried apple slices to the barrel at the very end of the aging process, not for flavor, but for finish, just to knock off some of that spice and burn at the end of the finish there. It really helped the product, adding that oven-dried apple slices, but it helped it for two reasons. And most important reason, number one, is the actual apple itself would help do just enough to give it a nice finish and help smoothen the product. But he did oven-dried apple slices because, as you know, if you lay something in a barrel and only age it a year, it's not going to have that nice charred brown amber color that you get in your everyday bourbons and whiskeys. It was more of a yellow color. So he was looking, to help with the assistance of the color as well. So the oven dried kind of golden brown aspect of the apple slices would assist with the color as well. So for that reason, we don't use actual apple slices today because the product you're tasting is a 4 to 5 year old blend of straight bourbon whiskeys. And at the very end of the aging process, we add just a hint of apple. In fact, it's less than 0.5%. So in order for something to be even considered a flavored product, I don't know the exact number, but I believe it's got to be like over 1.8% flavoring or something in that ballpark. Don't quote me on that. But ours is less than 0.5%. In fact, a lot of times when I'm tasting this product around the country and they're not familiar with this product, I won't tell them ahead of time that it's finished with a hint of apple. And a lot of times they can't even tell me it's there because of how subtle it is, because it's not there to flavor it. It's there as a finish. And that's what the term Alabama style means, finished with a hint of apple. But unlike actual legal definitions like Kentucky straight bourbon or Tennessee whiskey or things like that, the term Alabama style is actually trademarked to Clyde May's because it was my grandfather's recipe. So that's not to say that someone cannot make an Alabama whiskey or they can't add a hint of apple. They can absolutely do that. They just can't use the terminology Alabama style. And if you see the term Alabama style on the bottle, that's what it means. However, because we're most known for that, a lot of people think that all of our products are Alabama style, and they're not, just the ones that say it on the bottle.
Sure. Well, yeah, I definitely, this is, very smooth whiskey going down. I don't get a lot of burn. I know that the finishing is very subtle, but I do get hints of green apple throughout.
Oh, no, you pick it up, and and you nailed it. It actually is Granny Smith apple. So kudos to you. But what I love about this whiskey is it's just so diverse, and it's almost like the Swiss Army knife of whiskeys because it's very nice, neat or on the rocks to sip on by itself because it's 85 proof. And it's, with that hint of apple, it really smooths it out. But it also, like I mentioned, this is a straight bourbon. The only reason we can't call it a straight bourbon is once you add anything to bourbon, you can't legally call it bourbon anymore. So that's why we came up with the phrase Alabama style whiskey. But you get a lot of bourbon characteristics in this just because if it wasn't for that hints of apple, it would be bourbon. You get some of the sweeter notes like vanilla, maybe a little bit of caramel, and then the dried orchard fruits. If you get anything outside of apple, that's just the natural flavors coming from the barrel, and then the apple is added, but nothing else is, and it's just a very nice, smooth whiskey, and something that's enjoyable for anyone, whether you're a first-time whiskey drinker or been drinking whiskey and bourbon for 20 years. It's a product you can enjoy.
And this, you say it's about 5 years old?
It's a blend of 4 to 5. If I have to quote an exact age statement, I'm going to have to say 4, because you have to quote the youngest barrel used in the blend. But we use a blend of 4 and 5 year old straight bourbon whiskeys to make this product, and then we finish it with a hint of apple at the end of the aging process.
Yeah, I think it belies its age a little bit. It's got a nice mature taste to it.
It does. All of our products across the board really do have that characteristic where they taste a lot older than they are. When we released our rye whiskey, it was 3 years, 10 months old. Now it's a 4-year-old rye whiskey. But I was doing interviews and podcasts, and I had people who have been drinking whiskey for 20, 30 years asking me if it was an 8 or 9-year-old rye whiskey. And it wasn't. It was only a 3, almost 4-year-old.
It's a flavorful whiskey, and all of these flavors, I think, fit nicely, and it is an easy sipper, and kudos. I think you did real well with it.
I appreciate that. Kudos to Clyde May. He was ahead of his time with everything that he did, not just, figuring out kind of a finishing process, but he was a big believer in things like rye grain being a flavor grain. We know rye grain is a flavor grain today in kind of the bourbon community in the bourbon world. But, in the 1940s in Southeast Alabama, when you're in the woods making it, not many people were calling rye a flavor grain, and he was kind of ahead of the game, and he just, really knew what it took to make a great product. And we strive to carry on that same tradition and legacy today.
Well, it's definitely, as I've been sipping it here, I've started to pick up, particularly on the back of the palate, more rye spice. What's the rye content on this?
This mash bill is 75 corn, 21% rye, and 4% malted barley. So it has a decent amount of rye, not like just I wouldn't call that a high rye. I normally consider high rye kind of in the 30% range, but it's got enough rye to it to give it a nice balance. We didn't want it to be, over sweetened or anything like that. And while, most people associate moonshiners with corn whiskey, as I mentioned, my grandfather was using a good bit of rye in his mash or his makeup when he was making his whiskey. So we kind of continued the tradition in that way as well.
Well, we definitely appreciate that. John and I are big fans of rye, not only rye whiskey, but, using rye as a flavor grain for bourbon. And I kind of had a feeling there was a higher rye content there. And right. I always think that's great because I just love the flavor rye imparts.
Yeah, absolutely. Rye whiskey by itself tends to be kind of a love-hate relationship for a lot of consumers because some people don't like the rye spice of a rye whiskey, just by itself. But like I said, rye is a flavor grain. You got to have, some of that in there. If you don't have rye, you got to have something like wheat or another type of flavor grain. But rye, in my opinion, really can make or break a good bourbon or whiskey, depending on you don't have to have a ton of it, but you have to have the right amount of it.
Yeah.
Well, I finished mine, Luke.
There you go.
Could afford a little bit more, but that. I think it's very good, and
thank you.
It's frankly, I'm surprised how good it is, and it has nice legs on it, and I think it's pretty amazing. One, your whole story about how this business goes back, and two, how you've just started making it in such mass quantities, and it's delicious. You really did make a good whiskey there. Congratulations.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. It certainly didn't happen overnight. That's for sure. We've come a long way. We've, done the things we needed to do to, tweak and make a great product. And, that's what we strive to do and what we'll always do.
Well, coincidentally, John, my whiskey ran out too. So I think that's a perfect segue into our next bottle. we never just have one bottle in front of us. So
that's right.
The next one we have here is the Clyde May's straight bourbon whiskey.
Right.
So let's go ahead and get that a pour here.
So as I mentioned, this is actually just an everyday straight bourbon. It's actually the same mash bill as the Alabama style. Now the blend is a little different. The blend does consist of similar age barrels, but we do blend this a little different to create because we were tasked with when we branched outside of Alabama style, and started making products that didn't have that hints of apple. We were tasked with making sure that no matter what we made, regardless of the type, the proof, the mash bill, we have to do the right things to make a smooth, flavorful, high quality, super premium product. And that's what we set out to do with this bourbon. And it's a 92 proof, so not high, but not super low either. Non-chill filtered to kind of keep the maximum flavor in there, which I know that's a matter of debate in the bourbon community. But it's a very smooth, flavorful straight bourbon whiskey.
No non-chill filtered was up for debate. It seems to make sense that it would.
But most people will agree that by avoiding chill filtration, you allow more flavor to stay in the barrel. However, some people, what in life isn't debated by somebody? You know what I mean? So it's one of those things. I have heard people kind of argue not the effectiveness of keeping flavor in. I think people argue that maybe chill filtration doesn't do as much harm as some people claim it does. And I kind of agree with that. I've never claimed that chill filtration is a bad thing by any means. I've had chill filtered bourbons that were fantastic. It's just, we feel that by avoiding chill filtration, you're allowing all that flavor that came naturally from that char 4 barrel to stay in there.
Well, it's interesting you say that. We were just tasting, as a matter of fact, some Four Roses, and I was in a group where they gave us one barrel that was non-chill filtered, and as far as we knew, it was the only one they ever did that was non-chill filtered, and
right.
I thought it was great. I really enjoyed it. As a matter of fact, I treasure it. Luke's coming over next week to taste it.
There you go. Yeah, it's what I love about bourbon and whiskey, period, what makes me so fascinated by it, other than the fact that I have a family history with it, is just that there's so many factors at play that can just change the overall profile down. I could go on literally for an hour listing just the subtle things that could make a huge difference. Everything from, do you use sweet mash, sour mash? What kind of yeast are you using? What's your mash bill? Where are you sourcing your grains from? Where are you aging it? How long are you aging it? How often are you rotating it? What size barrels are you using? Are you standing it up or laying it down? Just so many things can affect a bourbon, which is why I tell people, don't buy in too much into, obviously you need to read what's on the bottle, because a lot of what's said on the bottle is important. But at the end of the day, the best way to judge a bourbon is kind of blank slate, forget about the proof, forget about the age, and just taste it.
That's right.
And see what you like and see what you don't like.
Well, it's up to you guys that make it to work through all of those processes and put something good on the shelf for us. Yeah,
absolutely. It's not an easy process, but it's one that I think we've gotten pretty good at. Just because my grandfather was really the best at it and what he was doing, because he was doing things just, in the moonshining community. For most moonshiners, it was all about speed and quickness and doing everything as quickly as you could, because you're doing something illegal. So nobody can blame you for that. of course. But my grandfather was a firm believer in taking your time. He cleaned his still and his material after every use. He did use what we call today a sour mash process, where he would use grains from a past run to use on his next run, to prevent as they called it, the whiskey from being too green, is what they would say. And, he did the little things that made a big difference. So, we did the same thing. We do the little things that can make a big difference.
So that brings up kind of something I was thinking about. Do you have any of your grandfather's old equipment, like his old still or any of that?
We do have one of his original stills. So he actually, if you were to go to Google right now and Google search moonshine still and go to Google Images, 95% of the images you will see are pot stills, because that's, what most moonshiners use. My grandfather actually designed a unique type of still. He referred to it, today we refer to it as a Clyde 240. But let me assure everyone that my grandfather was not a narcissist, so he did not call it a Clyde 240. He called it a tank, is what he called it. It's this big rectangular still. In fact, there's kind of a little diagram or kind of a drawing on it on the bottom right corner of this bottle of straight bourbon. If you look there at there's a little drawing. That's a Clyde 240. And he designed that because he was a believer, and we believe still, that it produced whiskey at a higher quality, and it kind of helped cook everything, or I should say distill everything more evenly. And so we have one of those in his possession, in our possession. The reason we call it a Clyde 240 is because in the late 1960s, around 1968, 67, it cost $240 just to build that one piece, not counting the other pieces, the pipe, the vat, the barrels you needed, the burner, all these other materials you needed. Just that one piece was $240, which, if you factor for inflation, I believe that's around $1,700 in today's money, give or take. So you got to think about that. Think about the dedication to your craft and your quality. When you're spending $240 for one piece of your still that you need in 1968, and at any given time, a local sheriff, an ABC agent, a federal agent, whatever, could come in and they would just hack it up with an axe that they got at the hardware store for a couple bucks. So he was doing, and to him, of course, that mattered, he didn't want it to get destroyed. That's why he would take the time to make sure he hid it in a good location. But at the same time, he was going to do whatever it took to make a great product, because he was a firm believer that his reputation was attached to every batch of whiskey that he sold. So if he sold Joe Smith, I'm just making up a name. If he sold Joe Smith 2 gallons of his best whiskey, and then next time Joe Smith wanted to order, Clyde tasted his whiskey and he didn't feel like it met that same standard of excellence as the previous batch, he would refuse to sell it. Because to him, if you do that to someone, you're selling someone a lie. And he was hard-nosed perfectionist. My dad has told me stories about my grandfather always had a full-time job. He was never just a moonshiner, but when he was farming, they would work all day, working on a barbed wire fence. And then my grandfather would see one strand of barbed wire would be crooked, and they would tear it down and start all over again. And he took that same mentality and put it into his whiskey. And it's even more impressive because taking that mentality into his making his whiskey kind of put him at a higher risk of getting caught. But he didn't care, because once, of course, he did what he did to provide a more comfortable life for his family in a very rural area that didn't have a whole lot to offer. But once he started, it became a piece of him. It got in his blood. And it meant a lot to him, and up until the day he died. When he died in 1990, and he was kind of, they called in the family. He was in the hospital. They said, "Hey, your father doesn't have much longer to live." one of the last things he said to his sons was he was telling them about certain orders that people had, and he was telling them, hey, make sure so-and-so gets the whiskey they ordered.
Amazing.
He's on his deathbed. I think he's got other things to worry about, but not to say he wasn't worried about that. I'm not trying to insinuate that, but he was focused on fulfilling everything he promised someone because his word was his bond. And it's easy to say in today's time, that you can be hardworking, you can be honest, but most of the time, if you're telling someone you're hardworking and honest, you maybe not as hardworking and honest as you say if you're having to, pat yourself on the back. He let his product do the talking for him. And that's what we do today. So,
well, going back, we're drinking the straight bourbon here, and I definitely, as I was just drinking it here, that green apple and the Alabama style, obviously is not present.
Right.
I get more of that traditional bourbon flavor, but still, you can tell that the grain recipe is similar in terms of it being smooth.
Right.
That subtle green apple sweetness is gone, but there's still that underlying sweetness, more that heavy, rich bourbon type flavor we expect. But still that same smooth distillate, and good smooth flavor. I mean, very, very easy drinking at 92 proof. It's not one you're going to have to water down at all. Which, for me that's always my preference. I understand why we add water to whiskey, but I'm not going to lie. I don't like it.
What the hell have you ever watered down, Luke?
To each his own, but I've always been a big fan, especially if I'm tasting a product for the first time. I'm always going to try it neat right out of the gate. I'm going to try it neat no matter what. And then based on what I taste, I'll determine not so much if I need to add water, but, if I need to add, one large ice cube or ice ball, and, that ice will slowly melt and that, add water, and it might open up certain flavor profile that you maybe didn't get when you were tasting it neat. However, when I drink our products, or really any bourbon or whiskey for that matter, about 90% of the time I'm drinking it neat, just because I like to make sure I'm picking up certain notes on the nose and the palate and the finish and everything like that. So, and then, but it's always nice, to sometimes, like to your point, not so much to add water, but to maybe add a large cube just to see what it does when it's a little bit chilled and when that ice slow. That's why I don't like to put multiple cubes or anything that's going to melt too fast. That's why I prefer, the large ice sphere or the ice ball, or, whatever people have available at home. So
sure, I agree. No, but this is just very, very approachable, very smooth. You're not going to, you don't struggle with it.
Right.
You're not struggling with burn at any point in the sip. The balance, it's very well balanced throughout.
Is this about the same age as we were speaking before?
Yes, it's the same. Like I mentioned, it's the same, or it's not the same blend. It's the same age of blend. We use 4 and 5 year old barrels, but we actually use kind of a different type of blend. I don't like to use the term sweet when I'm referring to bourbon, because that kind of gives it a negative connotation. I like to use the term soft. It softens the whiskey a little bit, despite the 92 proof, to make it a very smooth and flavorful bourbon.
Well, it definitely is that. I don't know if we asked you what's the price point on the straight bourbon?
The straight bourbon, as I mentioned, it's going to kind of vary as well, depending on your market. Most markets, you're going to see it right around that $39.99. Sometimes it'll be as low as $37.99, or maybe as high as a $41 or $42.99. But it's most of the time, even in various markets I've seen, it kind of sticks around that $39.99 price point, the high 30s or low 40s. So, very nice competitive price point. What we like to do is we like to put an ultra premium product at a more affordable price, not anything that's, $80 or $90 unless it has to be that due to age or whatever the case may be.
Well, I mean, that point right there is huge because, we've had the opportunity to taste a lot of, newer whiskeys that are coming out, and some are distilled in house, some are sourced, some are 4-year, some are 12-year and 14-year. But we've noticed the trend just in with our barrel team and doing the blog and the podcast. So many of these new whiskeys coming out, the retail price is $80, $100, $120. And while I understand it's a business and obviously you have to make money and to sell a product, but I think keeping the consumer in mind and letting the whiskey speak for itself and saying, listen, we're going to price this fair.
Right.
That is so nice to hear. And we don't hear it often. Right. I'll be honest with you. We just don't, because I think given the bourbon boom and the attention that's being paid to bourbon right now, it's easy for a company to say, hey, we have a product here. We can sell it for $80 and it will sell.
Right.
And, you could sell these at a much higher price point.
Right.
I would bet you wouldn't have a problem. But it's nice to hear, this is a very reasonably priced whiskey for, a consumer to just have an opportunity to taste whiskey. And, it's just nice to hear. And like I said, we don't hear it very often.
In today's bourbon world, it's, becoming more and more common to see the higher prices. And I get it. I understand, especially when you're a newer brand starting out, there's just so much uncertainty. Because one of the toughest things about bourbon is, forecasting. You got to forecast like, hey, I have a 5-year-old bourbon that's my best seller, and I want to continue to grow by a certain percentage every year. So how much am I going to be selling in 6-7 years from now? Because I got to lay down X amount of barrels to reach that. So I understand the varying price points, but, I do think in some cases, not all cases, because as I mentioned earlier when we were speaking, there's just so many factors that can create a great bourbon. I've had bourbon that was 15 years old that I loved, and I've had bourbon that was 15 years old that I didn't care for. I've had bourbons that were 2 years old that I didn't care for, and I've had bourbons that were 2 years old that I thought were really, really, really good. It's just, but you got to also factor in, I know it's hard to think, but you got to really factor in the consumer and what they're able or what they're willing to pay. And if anything, my advice to any, up and coming distiller or anything like that is, regardless of the price point, make sure that the liquid inside the bottle matches what you're pricing it at. I think that's and if it's not matching it, it needs to match from the point of view that it's exceeding expectations and not, under delivering. And I think that's, a case, that's the case sometimes, but, as you mentioned, for the money, I think our products across the board can compete with almost anyone.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Well,
especially for a company our size.
You put together one hell of a company in a short amount of time, and congratulations to your entire team. I can't,
Thank you.
I can't think of another one, frankly, that's done much more than you guys have, and you've grown to be one of the fastest growing makers of distilled spirits in the world or in the country, and that's pretty amazing. Where do you go from here? What kind of products do you see down the road?
Well, we like to look at everything kind of one step at a time. We like to, for example, I'll use our tequila and our Irish whiskey. Those are recent launches for us. The Prospero, it's been available for around 2 years now, give or take. The McConnell's Irish whiskey, the beginning of 2020 was really its launch. And with COVID-19, we've kind of, in some markets, kind of relaunched it and pretended like that first launch never happened. But with what we do in next steps, as we sit today, I think we're just focusing on the products we have and being as successful as we can be and continue to grow the products we have. And then down the road, if an opportunity presents itself where we feel like we can step inside another category or anything like that, I don't see why not. Because as you mentioned, Conecuh Brands has done as good of a job as any large or small company in the entire country at building ultra premium brands and doing it at a reasonable price. And me personally, as I mentioned earlier, I do what I do for Clyde May. Unfortunately, he didn't get the opportunity to, see what we've turned his name and brand into today. But to be honest with you, if Clyde May were alive today, he would still be making moonshine illegally. He never aspired to be a legal distiller because he didn't think it was possible. But it was his blood, sweat, and tears that, really is the backbone of this company and the story that we tell. And I'm forever grateful for what my grandfather Clyde May achieved in his life. And I can only hope that I can achieve, 10% of the success that he's had, because he was just, I tell my dad all the time, my dad has the exact same work ethic as my grandfather had. But they're just a different breed. They don't make them like Clyde May, like my dad, Billy May, anymore. I tell my dad all the time, listen, I can work from sun up to sundown and work my tail to the bone till the day I die, and I probably won't put in half the work you put in your life. They really went through the ringer to get where they are and where they were, and I just hope I can continue that legacy and to build a great brand and a great product.
Well, I think you've definitely done that.
I would say so. Who's your CEO?
Our CEO. He's you should interview him sometime. He's a great guy. His name is Roy Danis. He's based out of New York. He's someone that has just a tremendous amount of experience in the spirits industry and the wine industry. He's had his hands in both. He's been with some very large companies and very large brands, and has been a big key and has played a pivotal role in growing those brands. And he was someone that right out of the gates, we come from different worlds. He's from Long Island. I'm from the middle of nowhere in Southeast Alabama. But at the end of the day, we can come from different walks of life, but we can have the same attitude towards how hard we work and what we want to achieve in our lifetime. And when I met Roy for the first time in 2017, or actually it may have even been 2016, I can't remember. But when I met him for the first time, I knew instantly he was the man for the job he had. I knew right away that he was going to help take this company to new heights, and he has. And it's not, it's a team effort. It's kind of like when a quarterback wins the Heisman Trophy, he always makes sure he thanks his offensive line. He's like, hey, without these guys, I wouldn't be here. And while, myself and Roy and other people have had great success, we're nothing without the team around us and the people who have helped us, all the way for, not just our regional managers or anything like that. It goes all the way down to accountants and everything. Everybody has an important role to play, and the role they play has played a big success or a big part in our success, I should say.
Luke, I'm done, man. That's a great interview. LC May, you're
No, this LC, really, I can't thank you enough for not only sharing this whiskey, but your family's history and story. It's not every day you hear something like that where we talk about whiskey in the blood. That is truly amazing. And I think y'all have just done such a wonderful job of honoring your grandfather and what he stood for, and doing it in a way that everyone can reach, which again, I think is so important in this industry to
Right.
Make yourself available to more people, because that's not the norm. And I just can't congratulate you enough and thank you enough for sharing with us and all of our listeners. This is really a wonderful experience.
No, thank you. Whenever I'm given a platform to speak to, listeners or whatever the case may be, if I'm doing a bourbon tasting or whatever, I'm grateful for you. I'm very grateful that you had me on, and anyone that I can tell the story of my grandfather and they hear it, it means a lot, because I'm one person. I can only do so much. So whenever I'm given a platform to kind of spread the gospel of Clyde, I guess, to as many people as I can, and I'm immensely grateful for that. So thank you for having me tonight. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm more than happy to be back anytime that you'll have me, because I really enjoyed it.
Well, I think we can definitely do that. To everyone listening, you've heard the great story of Clyde May. So I encourage you, go get some of his whiskey, give it a try, and let us know what you think. Reach out, share your experience. And but I think now that you've heard this, I think you'll have an even more fond appreciation for the whiskey you're drinking. LC, we know we got to let you go. Thank you again for joining us. We look forward to chatting with you in the future.
Thank you very much. Cheers, guys. Thanks.
Cheers. Hey everyone, thanks again for tuning in to the Capital City Bourbon Show. We have more great episodes planned for you in the future, so come back and join us on the porch. Cheers, y'all.